Good afternoon or good morning to everybody who's joining us right now. Thanks for being here today. My name is Michelle. I will be your webinar host, where we have quite a few people who are going to be joining us today. So we'll give it a few minutes to let everybody enter the room. If you wouldn't mind, while we're waiting, go ahead and use that chat and let us know where you're dialing in from. I love to see where everybody's coming from. I especially love when we have somebody from Alaska and then somebody from Florida. I just get the biggest kick out of that. So we have tribes all over the place, and it's just so cool to see everybody, joining in. So I am actually dialing in from my home office today in Petoskey, Michigan, which is in the northern part of Lower Michigan. Beautiful day today. It actually kind of almost feels like it's getting to be fall. I'm feeling fall tones in the air. So, we do have somebody from Alaska. Awesome. The Pueblo of Zuni. Awesome. Nice to see you guys here. Thanks for joining. Colby, where are you located at?
We are in Laramie, Wyoming. So it's about
Wyoming.
2.5 hours northwest of Denver.
Okay. Nice. And what about you, Judge?
I am in Nevada, on the California-Nevada border near Lake Tahoe.
Okay, nice. We were kind of in that area last year for our TribalHub conference. We were in Reno, so kind of in
about an hour north of me to Reno.
Okay, yeah. Okay, the Kickapoo tribe, Oklahoma. Awesome, good stuff. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here. Again, everybody, welcome to our webinar today. My name is Michelle, part of the TribalHub team, hosting your webinar, which is brought to you by Handel. Our webinar today is titled Upgrading Tribal Court Data Management Technology to Improve Outcomes. Special thanks to Handel and the Handel team for sponsoring the webinar today. Our presenters are Colby Fenster of the Handel team and Judge Patricia Lenzi, Chief Judge of the Cedarville and my screen is
Winnemucca.
Oh geez, here I'm going all over the place. There we go. Cedarville and Winnemucca Tribal Courts. Yes, thank you. Our session today will be recorded on TribalHub.com. So if you would like to share it with anybody, you can feel free to share that link. You will also be getting an email after the webinar that has a link to the video recording as well. So feel free to go and share that to anybody else who may not be on the call today. A couple of learning objectives to take away from the webinar. With having Judge and Colby on here, it's a great idea. Use that time to ask all the questions you want. Use the chat box. Use the Q&A if you don't want to put it out there. That goes right to us. And get your questions answered. It's a great space. It's a learning space, and we're glad you guys are here. And just a shameless plug for TribalNet coming up in September, San Diego. We are super excited. Can't wait. We also recently launched a new merch shop, which is pretty cool. I got a little pet little shirt for my cat, and it's adorable. So we have all kinds of stuff there. So take a look. And now I'm going to hand it over to Colby to start our presentation. And there you go. All right.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And give me 1 sec to share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. And I'll hand it over to Judge Lenzi real quick to do a quick introduction for her, and then I'll introduce myself a little bit more formally.
All right. So my name is Pat Lenzi, and I am Chief Judge at a number of tribes: Winnemucca Indian Colony, the Cedarville Rancheria, the Chemehuevi Tribal Court. And in the past, I was at the Washoe Tribal Court as Chief Judge. I just retired as Chief Appellate Judge at my own tribe, the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's Court of Appeals. I am a member of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. I am of the Wolf Clan, and my background, I went to undergrad at University of Texas, San Antonio, law school at UC Berkeley Law School, and I've worked in state court, federal court, tribal court as a prosecutor, as a civil litigator, various roles. I've done some administrative hearings, and I've been a tribal court judge exclusively since about 2013. I have worked with Colby and a few other tribes getting tribal courts to use technology. So I've worked with Right Track at a couple of tribal courts, and I'm honored to be able to explain how it's worked in different settings, starting from ground zero at each tribe, and what was different from tribe to tribe about how it works to get this management and technology in place, what some of the pains were, what some of the good parts were, what the goals are, since we're all tribal courts and we're just starting in a lot of cases or still improving after years in place. I also am part of a federal contractor team assessing tribal courts. So I've seen a lot of tribal courts beyond the ones where I work, and I've seen different systems and used different case management systems at different places. So I think my background is a little bit wide ranging, and it helps explain the good and the bad, and I can answer a lot of questions as we go along. Colby?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Great. I don't know if I can live quite up to that, but my name's Colby Fenster, and I'm with Handel Information Technologies. I'm the head of our customer relations department currently, and also a project manager. I've been with Handel for just under 7.5 years, and I majored in computer science, had a minor in mathematics, and essentially started working for Handel when I was a sophomore in college, and have been here ever since. And essentially my goal as Handel's head of customer relations and a PM is I assist our various clients with implementing our different modules for different case management systems. And then I work with them on identifying, our system can do 80% of what they need it to do. Let's identify how we need to get that other 20% in the system so it functions correctly and efficiently. And then I also really enjoy working with tribes on taking the data out of their system and using it to answer grant questions, answer questions from council, and really just using it to improve the services that they can offer. So with that, we'll kind of do a quick overview of the webinar, which I think Michelle's done a great job of kind of highlighting already. But essentially, we're going to start with kind of introducing the idea of a case management system. You'll see it abbreviated throughout this presentation, or even as we're talking, we just call it a CMS. And essentially, that's just a system to manage your case files. And we'll be focusing kind of on an electronic version. So pen and paper and file folders and things like that, that's technically a case management system. But we'll be going through putting that online or through a software. And so we'll have Judge Lenzi kind of talk about the process of obtaining that as she's worked with several tribes, and then, things to consider when choosing a CMS. And then we'll kind of jump in and talk about, okay, you've decided on which case management system you're going to go forward with. What's next? What does that project process work like? Because a lot of people like to think when the contract's been signed, the work is done. And a lot of times that means the work's just getting started. And then we'll kind of go over some of the benefits and show you some examples of what we try and provide to our clients with our software called Right Track when or what they get out of implementing their system. So with that, I'll hand it over to Judge Lenzi.
All right, let's hold there for a moment. So the first thing as a judge is I'm trying to figure out what system do we need? What are the things we have? So for example, at one tribe, we had literally a pile of electronic documents, and it was 3 different cases, just kind of all emailed to me at once of, hey, this is everything we've done at the tribal court, and here you go, this is the case. And it turned out it was 3 cases. So it took me weeks actually to read through everything and understand, oh, wait, this is from this court. This is from a different court. Yes, they're all related cases, but only one of them was actually in the court where I was presiding. So I had to figure out, all right, I've got a pile of electronic PDFs of cases, and there wasn't even a paper file. So we had to figure out, okay, do we create a paper file? We sure do, but we have to put it in reverse chron. We have to label it. Well, the same thing goes on with a electronic system. We want to know, what do we need? Do we need from ground zero like that? Or is it like another tribe had, a pretty sophisticated case management system that ceased electronic support, and you either had to go to their new system, which was way more expensive, or find a different system. But we had one that had all the documents by case, in reverse chronological order, that we could search them, that we could find hearing dates. We could look up different things, whether it was an order or whether it was a motion or exhibits. And so that tribe had a much more sophisticated system. We had another one where there were 5 different judges. And so each judge had a different level of ability with software. And we had to find a system that would work for the people that are used to pen and paper and the ones that are used to, everything's electronic, everything's on the cloud. So you need to know, what are you looking for in a system generally? Go ahead. Next, click. Then we set meetings. Every tribe does meetings, but we set meetings with the appropriate stakeholders. So, for example, we had to have the judge, the court clerk, the prosecutor, social services, the public defender, any civil litigation. Some departments have a civil department for their court, and the tribe offers civil representation to people appearing in court. Other tribes don't, but it might be outside attorneys or advocates who are licensed in your court. They know what they need out of a system, what they need to be able to look up. Do we need to retain the files? Yes. How long do you retain them for? So how much space are you going to need? What's in them? Are they just paper documents and PDFs, or are you going to need a system that can also include court recordings, audio or video, Zoom meetings? Since we all just went through the pandemic, we have big electronic files of Zoom hearings because the Indian Civil Rights Act, if you're doing certain things, requires you to be a court of record and you have to have a recording of the hearing. Or is it an audio cassette recording? What do you have in the way of recordings? If you're applying for a grant, someone in the meeting might say, well, I want to apply. That's all right. We're not there yet, but we might need to apply for a grant. So is that part of what you're going to need? If you're looking for what could happen to your records, where are you going to keep them? So, for example, at one tribe, there was you look at Maui right now, if they had a tribal court and all your files were paper and it was in Lahaina, it's gone. I have assessed courts where the tribal court was burned down by arson and all records were lost because they were not stored or backed up anywhere other than the paper files on site. I have another tribe that I was a judge at where the files were chewed up by mice because the storage building wasn't really mouse proof. And that happens. At Cedarville, unfortunately, there were files that were in the room when the mass shooting happened, and they were seized as evidence, not to mention damaged by the blood and the other damage that was done in the room. And those were held by the state during a criminal trial. So we had to get copies because we didn't have them electronically backed up. So there's different things of, where are your files? What would happen to them? If you keep paper files, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in those. Maybe the ink fades or it gets wet in a flood or otherwise. And if you're using not a laser printer, not only would the pages stick together, but the ink might melt off and you can't read the file anymore. So there are problems with that. Also, going back to the initial needs, the case management system could be much more secure than whatever you have, even if you have a locked room for your files. So now we're having our meetings. We need to know, does IT need to be involved? Because it turns out IT is very important at the tribe about setting up what their rules are, what the protocols are at the tribe for retaining electronic documents that the tribe needs. And so also converting from an old system to a new system, IT might need to work with someone like Right Track, with the IT folks at Right Track or at whatever case management system you choose, to make sure the two systems speak the same language when you're moving files over. They have to plan for how much size do you need? Do you need a big electronic storage server, or is just space on something else good enough? If you put it space on the tribe server, is it going to be kept separate where somebody from the clinic can't go into a confidential court file and start looking up stuff on their family? So how do you divide that at the tribe's IT system? And so they have to be involved. They may have to integrate audio and video recording, so they might need to do that. And then again, security. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Next
Yep, there it goes.
That's all right. So you need money to pay for this. During the pandemic, there was a lot of money that became available for electronic conversion. And so I know one tribe worked with using the CARES funding, another one used whatever the next part of the federal funding was in that. So those options existed. I don't know if your tribe took advantage of those, if they have those funds sitting there and they're wondering how to use them. That might be one, but that's gone. There's CTAS, very competitive, really hard to get, but it does exist. You can apply for that grant. Sometimes there's a flavor of the day federal grant where it's going to be for, any cases involving domestic violence. At one point, that was the main focus. Now, fentanyl is a focus. At times, it's been, DUI or other things. So figure out what is the Congress's favorite topic these days that would help you get a grant. And then there's the court assessment process. As I said, I'm part of an assessment team, and that provides one-time funding, which isn't really one time, and it can be asked for annually. You can get the assessment every 5 years, but really you could do it at 4 years if needed. And if you've made changes, you can ask for a new assessment to say, okay, we've done these other things you suggested back when, now we need a case management system. And they have provided that case management system funding to multiple tribes. So that's usually a pretty good option. You do have to request an assessment of your court, and then you have to make a funding request. But maybe there is, maybe there's a private foundation that's doing some kind of funding for tribes. Some tribes I know have moved to asking for foundations or private grant money. Sometimes it's state funding that allows for it, and they have a pool of money. If you're in California, there may be RSTF funding that can be used for your government, and you can tap into your court's portion of the RSTF, which is the gaming money that goes to non-gaming tribes from the gaming tribes in California. So there might be funding there. Those are some of the options. Go ahead. Next bullet. So Oh, and going back to the funding options, just a couple of things. If it's coming from a grant or a department budget, you may have internal options. I know at some tribes they have, if it's going to cost this much, you have to have so many bids before you can choose which one. So regardless of where you got the funding, there's internal tribal requirements that you're also going to need to meet. So you might have to get 3 bids. You might have to get 5. You might be able to go with just 1 because you use the same vendor for something else and they're already considered involved in that department in the court. So on other requirements that you might have for the case management system, there might be, what other requirements might you need? Do you have data that you need to track? Is it for domestic violence cases that you really need to track because the funding came from some source where DV is involved or stalking or MMIW? Then, okay, what are your requirements? What do you have to track? So you have to work with the case management system on that. What do you see this case management system for? It seems like, well, the court files will be in there. Yay. Okay. But if you're going to apply for grants, you need to be able to track data to say, we had this many, say it's a DUI, type of grant. And so you need to track how many arrests are there that are alcohol involved, was driving involved. So you need to know what kind of system is going to have those requirements or will be able to track use of certain drugs so that if it's fentanyl that you're focusing on, you're tracking that. There was a question. Go ahead. Let me see.
I think it was on the topic of if there's any integrations at all between, I think the question says tribal court, law enforcement, and prosecutors are on separate systems. What do you do to get those to connect and stuff?
Okay. Colby, do you want to take that? I can talk about it from the court side because I've seen go ahead from the technical side.
Yeah, so that's definitely something a lot of, I think, companies are out there, they're looking at on doing. From Handel's end, we have what we call different modules. And so we have like a tribal court module, a tribal police module, and they're kind of designed to plug and play. So that way, you can have everybody using the same system, but they're on different, they only see what they need to see and so on. But if you do have another part of your court that is already using another system, most vendors should be willing to do what's called an integration. I work with the Bear River tribe or the Bear River band in California, and their police department uses a software called eForce for issuing their citations. And so we did an integration with eForce where when they approve a citation in eForce, tribal court gets notified, and then they can copy that data and import it in from eForce into RightTrack. So that way they, have the citation information. They have what the person was cited for. They have any evidence or documents uploaded or tied to the citation and everything. But that really is just going to depend on your vendor, or I guess both vendors, and them working together and, deciding how it needs to function.
And if a tribe decided to go, Colby, I'm going to ask you with this in mind. If a tribe said, well, we have one system for social services, we have a different one for the police, we have a different one for probation, and a fourth one for the court. We want it all in one with 4 modules. Would the right case management system be able to do that, convert each of those other 3 and the courts, and then have it all one system, but with modules?
Yeah, and that's theoretically that should be possible, and that's kind of not to plug too much of RightTrack and stuff, but that's kind of our basis is usually each section has their own specific data that they need to track, and then you just implement security on top of it to protect that information. So, for example, I've had clients in the past that their guardian ad litem is involved in in the system. They don't need access to every single civil case or criminal case per se. So they'll have their own little section to track their notes and documents, but then we'll do security to where they can only see the certain case files that they're involved in. Just as kind of an example of how you can share that information together. The other nice advantage of that is if you do kind of have that set up, you know, I enter somebody's name and I have their address. If I provide that to the court and say, this is my address, and then I go to social services and say I live somewhere else, or, you know, you can kind of detect of like, well, we have your address as this. Did you notify the court, and different things like that.
Okay, thank you. So, and that's the other thing is you need to set security levels for other requirements. So, for example, at one tribe, we have both civil and criminal litigation. So the prosecutor doesn't need access to the civil, but does need access to the criminal. So criminal, they have full read access to everything, can see all the people involved, all of their data, like their name, date of birth, address, contact info, so that they can send subpoenas and stuff. But they don't have access to the civil. The civil lawyers don't need access to the criminal cases. They need access to their files. So you can limit, depending on the system you have. It's almost like invites in Dropbox versus using OneDrive, which I will talk more about in a minute. But that's kind of the limits. You can set who can see things, whether they can edit or not. So I suggest anybody with editing be your most involved court staff. So if you have a technical savvy judge, then yeah, they should be able to edit things, change like the name of a file from scanner 1234 on August 8th, you know, whatever, to motion for summary judgment. So that's something where somebody with editing capacity could do it, or the court clerk. But I really would strictly limit who can do things like that. Anybody else can look, they can call to your attention if something is mislabeled, but you don't want everybody editing as they see fit.
Can I add one more thing real
Go
quick
ahead.
on security too? This is something that I've had a couple of clients run into once we've kind of started that implementation process. And it's not really it's how do we want the software to work, but also it's important to discuss internally before you're picking your system. How are you going to handle it if there's somebody that's involved in a case that's an employee of your court? So for example, let's say your court clerk gets a speeding ticket and they have a civil citation. Do you have policies in place that you know, someone else is going to be entering that into the system? Is it fine if they have access to it? Some courts go the route of they need the system to prohibit that access. Other courts go more of an internal policy and say, you know, if we find out you're accessing information you shouldn't be, you know, we'll take disciplinary action. And most systems nowadays are going to have audit logs to help you track and identify if people are messing with data or changing data. Read access can get a little bit tricky just because if you think about it, if every time you click on a page, we're tracking that you loaded it, that takes up a lot of storage space in your database. So there's just some pros and cons there to kind of consider, and some of those questions to ask when you are kind of determining these other requirements of, do we need to have that next level of security, or are we going to have policies in place to address some of these things?
Another thing to consider is your system going to be cloud-based, up on a cloud, or does your tribe have a requirement that everything has to be on the tribe server? So do you have server space for it? If you're putting video recordings in, they're huge. So you need a lot of server space, which means you need funding for a lot of server space. And then you need to figure out, how are you going to link the documents in the case management system to the video and audio recordings of your hearings. So there's a lot of other considerations. All of this means it's expensive. So what do you need and what do you want? and try to figure out that difference. Are you going to need that data conversion? And Colby is going to talk more about the whole conversion process. So now go ahead, click to the next.
Okay. Yep.
Stopgap measures. When you don't have a case management system, like I came into the one court and it was, here's an email with the file, here's the next part of the file, here's another email, and I would get like 20 and 30 emails. We'd start with Dropbox. I will tell you there are limits. It's really ungainly. It's hard to use, but it can be used. So some tribes go with Dropbox. There's a really small amount of space you can use for free, and then you have to pay for bigger space. OneDrive, if you have OneDrive, usually has a terabyte per email address. So that's huge. It is cloud-based. So you got to make sure that works for your policy, but I have used OneDrive for some tribes. And then you can invite within that who can see a file, who can read it, who can download from it, who can edit what's in your file. You can have Zoom recordings, WebEx, GoToMeeting, some of those recordings. Again, you need to talk to your tribal council and IT to make sure that if you're taking paper files and sticking them in Dropbox on the cloud, or sticking them in OneDrive on the cloud, or if the tribe has its own internal cloud, as I've seen at some tribes, how is it getting there? So you have to involve, IT. Also, the stopgap on using WebEx and Zoom, I know I'm not as familiar with GoToMeeting, but you can have it transcribed. So you get kind of free voice to text, which is cheaper than, or it's included in the software rather than in having to pay for a transcription software on top of it. Go ahead, next. So when you pick the best one, and you can click the next one, when you pick the best system for your court, understand the system you're looking at. What can it do? What can't it do? Is this one going to work for you or not? Get a demonstration. So I had at courts where we've been choosing systems, I'd get demos from 3 and 4 and 5 different vendors just to see, so that I could figure out which one made sense to that clerk and to me, and what works best for this court given what we needed. So we'd get demos, and then we'd work with the internal folks on what this one has to be. Remember, your court clerk is going to have completely different needs than your prosecutor or civil advocates or defense. They're going to have different needs than social services if you're integrating those cases. So you're going to have different needs, and then make sure you have a really, really good understanding of what that software system does, how it functions. Even if you have to have them set up a sandbox, more or less, for you to play in on their system to try it. So I know as we started choosing system, the vendor would set up a beta setup where I could go in, the clerk can go in, we can try different things. We're not messing it up. We can fix what we've done wrong. We can correct it, make it work better for the tribe, and then eventually it goes live. So there was a question. I do want to get to that. Both Google and Zoom were discussed as not being compliant with most tribal sovereignty laws. Microsoft is the front runner in this space. Can we let Chad explain what he means by Microsoft is the front runner in this space?
Yeah, for sure. Let me open up
your mic. So Chad, if you could explain a little more.
Check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, so in the Tribal ASAC meeting, we were just discussing virtual meeting spaces. And one of the things that came up was many tribes are investigating both Google and Zoom for not basically adhering to the tribal privacy and or sovereignty. And it makes me think that probably would roll over into some of their other data repositories as well.
Sure.
What they're going to comb through that data and perhaps make it available to some AI engines such as ChatGPT, et cetera, et cetera. So really dig into that. Tribes need to dig into that. Their IT departments really need to dig into that to make sure that you know what you know before you find out that your information's out there on the web for everyone to read it.
Thank you. And what does Microsoft appear to be doing? What are they doing that's different?
They just appear to be adhering or honoring, in a sense, more the privacy, the way they build their tenants out within the Azure cloud structure apparently is not so public, and they're not using their own engines to scrape data from those.
Okay. Thank you.
Again, something to research. Everyone's got to do their own research. Don't take my word as law. That's
No,
for sure.
no,
Do
that's
your own research.
really helpful though. So there's other considerations. See, that's news to me, and that makes a lot of sense, and it's scary. So after that, though, there is a process. Once you pick a system, you have uploading, renaming documents. So when you switch from one system to another, all the data moves on whatever day it does, which means reverse cron doesn't work as well because everything was moved at once. So for chronological order of files, they're all going to come in with the same date and time. And you have to figure out a naming convention or some other way to keep your file, your court file, in chronological order so that if you need the oldest order in the case versus the newest order, you have a way to look that up easily. So at one place, we started naming the files, and that gets into a long name stream, but with numbers that include the date that the item is from. So it may be order, it may be, 8/15/23 order. So that tells you it's the August 15, 2023 order. And then you may have to say what it's an order about, order, summary, judgment. And that way, anybody looking, it'll come up in that chronological order because of the numbering being first. But then it'll also say this is an order. So you could look it up depending on the case management system. You're calling an order in that, but you can look it up more carefully. There's also data entry by the court staff. Some of it is automatic in these. A lot of it is painstaking and time consuming to begin with. You have to start with each bit of data, add in John Smith, and what date was John Smith born, and where does he live, and does he have a mailing address that's different? Is he a member of a tribe? Are you tracking that data? Are you entering it? What other data do you need? Phone numbers, emails, other contact info. Well, that tells you who he is. That doesn't tell you what cases. So now you need to link him to certain cases. And then if you have a new case, does John Smith come up automatically with all his info, or do you have to enter it again? Most of that, Colby will address how that works. That's my portion now, and I'm going to hand it to Colby.
Perfect. So yeah, now we'll kind of transition over to, okay, you've signed your contract, maybe you've picked your system. What does that kind of process look like? Vendors out there may say you can just use our out of the box solution. We can have you logged in tomorrow, and you can start entering your data. That's great and everything, but usually there should probably be a little bit more planning involved between you and your vendor before you officially go live with your new system. And so we'll kind of explain I'll go through the project process from a vendor standpoint and why we do certain things on our end, and just kind of explain what you can expect as you're moving through the contract signature date to you actually using your new system. So like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times people can think, okay, the work's done. I already had to do all this work to get the contract signed. Unfortunately, some more work's just about to start as well. So during this project section, the one thing I just want to remind everyone is this is a time where your vendor is really going to need involvement and feedback and participation, not only from the administration, but also your staff that are going to be using and entering data into the system. when you purchase a system, I don't think anyone has the idea that it's going to make your life more harder or more difficult, or even harder to do your job and stuff. But sometimes, there's only one way to do things, or that's if you want the data, you have to enter it. And those can kind of be shocks to some people. So that's just where be honest with your vendor if you're having concerns or if you're having questions. But that also kind of goes back to kind of understanding your system and making sure you have a fairly good idea of what it's all designed to do when you purchase it. So with that, when you kind of talk about the project phase, we do several different phases on Handel's end. We normally start with what we call a joint application development session. And this just stands for essentially, it's a fancy term for us saying, we're going to meet with you and your staff and figure out everything that you do and how your process works. And that may be kind of simple. A lot of tribal courts are similar, but there's a lot of things that you guys can do slightly differently. Or if you think about things like your charge codes or your civil codes and things like that, your system probably has a spot for you to enter that information, but how is that information going to get entered? Is that something your vendor is going to need you to enter into the system? Can you provide them a list that they can import into the system? Or is it one of those, as we come across it, we'll add it to the system? So those are just kind of things you'll talk about during your JAD session on figuring out, how are we going to populate our system initially before we essentially go live? And it also, if you do have some, let's say, customization or you're planning on having to modify the system, this is a great time for us to discuss that with you and figure out exactly how that's going to work. I was recently working with a tribe in Texas for their joint applications development session, and we found out during their case management review system, they create a case file for every single charge or an offense a person receives. So if I got arrested for a DUI, a speeding ticket, and reckless driving, they're creating 3 separate case files, one for each offense. And so how is that going to translate to your system? If you're wanting to track data, and then you're going to have to create cases 3 times. So for their end, they're having to go through and say, okay, this person's the petitioner on all 3 cases. This is the judge on all 3 cases. This is the prosecutor, and so on. So that's just where, they were kind of more shocked to learn, like, oh yeah, that's going to be quite the data entry process for us to get that information in the system. Can we build tools to make that easier for you? Or do we change our own process internally? So is that a chance now to discuss, okay, do we talk about switching from doing a case for each offense to just doing one case for an incident or one citation, so it would be CR 2023 and 15, and it's going to have both offenses listed in there. So those are kind of things that you'll figure out during the JAD session. It's not going to be designed to do a gotcha moment or anything like that. It's just helping your vendor kind of understand how they can train you to get how they can train you to get your data in the system. We can always recommend and say best practices and things like that, but ultimately it's your system. So if you want to decide you want to use something this way, that's up to you, and you can kind of decide those things. But that's where that JAD session really comes into play, where you can get that information. And we can do in-person JAD sessions.
One thing on that, we did at some tribes completely renumber the case numbering system. So you've probably seen that if you've had case management systems in the past. Don't be wedded to the numbers you have and the way you number your cases necessarily. You might want to change it to make it more user-friendly for everybody. Okay, yeah. Thanks. Sorry, stepping back.
No, that's totally fine. And yeah, that's another great point about the JAD session, is it can be a chance to discuss changes of things you're going to do new in your court. Like Judge Lenzi mentioned when we were working with the Washoe tribe, they used to have WT in every single one of their case numbers. And it was kind of realized that maybe that doesn't need to be there anymore. And so starting with the new system, it was now going to be just CR 23, or a new numbering system. So things like that, this is a great time to change things in your court if you're running into issues or have questions on, maybe there is an easier way to do what we're currently doing. So after that, then you're probably going to do what's called a design review if you have customization. And essentially that just is where the vendor is going to outline how the functionality is going to work and what they're changing in their standard system. Or even if they don't have an out of the box system, if they're building you a solution from the ground up and stuff, that's great as well. Just make sure they're able to provide you documentation on how it works, because this is a great thing to reference when it comes to training, and especially when it comes to programming. The software is only going to do what you're telling it to do. So if you need it to do something else, make sure that's documented and wrote down or in a document somewhere that outlines that. We've had clients, for example, when we're doing kind of their design review session, we'll have a docket form and they say, I want the docket to look this way. So we start, designing it and say your docket's going to look X, Y, and Z. Well, then they go live and their criminal cases are showing up on their civil docket. And why is that happening? Well, we said in our, form and everything, the docket was going to have all case types and all that stuff. So those are things, your vendor should be able to work with you to get that fixed, but that can save some heartache and headaches initially. If you,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say during the design review phase, it's a good point to really pay attention to what they're showing you and outlining, exactly on a step-by-step basis how it's supposed to work.
So at one tribe, we wanted the docket to print out. There was a 9:30 calendar, an 11 o'clock calendar, a 1:30 calendar, a 3 o'clock calendar. And so we needed it to segregate cases by what time they were on, rather than a list of the whole day alphabetical. And we have to look at it and go, oh, wait, that one, with a last name beginning with A is actually on the 3 p.m. calendar. So look at that design review, figure out how you want your docket to look. Do you want every other line, every other case to have like gray shading in the background so you can easily glance at it and go, well, that's John Smith's DUI case. The next one is John Smith's domestic battery case. Or you want all of John Smith's case to be shaded one way and the next person to not be shaded at all, and then the one after that to be shaded. So the design review is to make it so that it works the way you want it to. Go ahead.
And with that, a lot, depending on your vendor and stuff, it's be like, well, great, while we're designing, I kind of see these changes happening and stuff, depending on your learning style. If you're more of a hands-on learning, this can be a bit of a struggle because, you're wanting to be able to see what you're reading or practice and stuff. And just unfortunately, like a lot of software companies probably aren't going to be able to give you that option, because similar to like a contractor, if you have them build your house, they're probably not going to start building your house and then, oh, I want the roof to be like this now, and then tear down the roof and rebuild it and all that type of stuff. So that's just where your vendor hopefully should be able to provide you, good examples of either what that functionality is. Maybe they've done it with another client of theirs, or like a lot of times what we do at Handel's End, we'll kind of start with what we call mock-ups. These mock-ups here are going to kind of help us outline exactly how the thing's going to look in the system. So I use kind of a project management software on my end where I can go through and I'm going to document, this is how I want the fields to look. And then I'm going to try and get it as close as possible to the system. So when you're looking at an image like this and comparing it to what I'm able to show you in a demo and stuff, hopefully that kind of helps that connection of like, okay, yep, I see the add button. If I want to indicate somebody's in jail and this is the case number they're in jail for, this is what it's going to look like. And your vendor should also be able to provide you what we call a design document with all of this kind of formalized and stuff. So give me one sec to pull that up real quick. And I'll show that as kind of an example. So this is an example of one of our design documents. So if we're working with a client and we're making changes and stuff, we're going through and providing them essentially a section in here to document exactly how the function is going to work. So if this client, for example, wanted to track foreign orders that they get, they didn't really have a place to track that before. Okay, so we'll have a section in our system for you to be able to do that. This is what the screen's going to look like when you're viewing all of them. When you click the add button, this is what the screen's going to look like. These are going to be your data points. When you click on the edit button, here's an example of it filled out of what it's going to look like with data. And then here's your, final detail view of what it's going to look like when you're saving. So this is really important for, it's not fun. I have a hard time even convincing myself sometimes that going through a 60-page or 70-page document showing exactly how things are going to work is fun to do, but it's really important to save some of those troubles you're going to run to later on. And then we can also provide like schema and stuff. This is going to be more for your IT department, and kind of tying back to what Judge Lenzi mentioned on if you're going to be hosting your own data or if it's going to be hosted by the vendor and stuff. If you have an IT department that's interested in doing your own data analytics and stuff outside of the system, this is going to be helpful for them because they'll know exactly how the data is being stored, how things are going to be tied together, and can use that for their own internal needs. And so same thing here, like when we talk about like case number generation, that's something a lot of our clients ask about. We don't do that right out of the box just because everyone does it a little bit differently, but we need to document, okay, this is exactly how it's going to work. So when we go to add a case number or a case file in the system, we're going to look at the case file type and see if it's a criminal case or a civil case. Then we're going to find the filing date or the filing year. Okay, and then we're going to see how many other cases exist in that same year and same type. And then we'll add 1 and 0. It's really technical, but that's exactly the steps the computer is going to follow. It's not just as easy of just make it do this. We need to tell the system to follow these exact instructions. So this helps the system kind of outline, okay, we have all of our information, and then we're going to generate the case number to be in the format of this, for example. And so that's just going to be, again, some of those things when you're discussing it. Make sure you're really paying attention to what you're seeing in your documentation. And if you have questions, ask your vendor, ask them to re-explain things. If something doesn't make sense with how they've identified it in the system, ask them to add it. They should be able to work with you, because they want to make sure that you understand exactly how your system's working, so there's no surprises. And this can be a great training reference or training material as well, because everyone kind of does it similarly, but also they have the way or the ability to do things differently. You may have they may not be able to provide you a video automatically that says, here's how to create a case, because you might have some different steps. But if you're more of a person that learns by reading and stuff, you can go through here and exactly figure out and say, okay, when I go to create a case file, looks like I don't have to enter this field because the system's doing XYZ for me. I want to know how the child support's going to work in the system. Okay, here's the person, here's the amount, the system's going to do this for me. All that type of stuff should be all documented, and it should be able to be provided by your vendor for that information. So with that then, the next thing we kind of have is a data conversion. And so that's something you may have. A data conversion doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from another system and we're magically having it be in the new system. Sometimes that's hiring a temp worker to copy information from your old system into your new system. Or maybe they're going through your paper files and uploading that into the new system. That can be a data conversion or an option. Otherwise, if you do more of a database to database type conversion, those are things you'll just want to work with your vendor on. Essentially, they just need a copy of your existing data so that they can kind of figure out how the other system was mapping that data over and how they need to map it over to their system. A lot of times this data may be kind of coming over as like apples to apples, but sometimes you get some weird things that's like trying to bring an apple and it's an orange in the other system. So things like demographic information, name, date of birth, addresses, all systems probably have that exact same information. It's just a matter of where it's stored. But when you get into like criminal charges or hearing documents or things like that, that's where you may run into some issues where the vendor's just going to have to figure out where that information was in the old system and how to bring it over into the new system. And they should be able to sit down and review with you. When we did a conversion with Judge Lenzi for the Washoe tribe, we had several meetings where we essentially would have them pull up their old system, and then I would pull up on our training site that exact same case number, and we would go through line by line and say, okay, do we have all 7 hearings here? Do all the dates and times match up? Does the contact information on the plaintiffs match? And everything like that to make sure it's coming over accurately.
I know we're getting toward the end of
Yeah.
our time here. So
Yeah.
you did do training sessions with us, and then and we invited all the people that were using the system to join the training so they could ask other questions. We could do further refining before we go live, and it's real. And then even after it's live, you're going to have to tweak the system.
Yeah, that's before we kind of move on to some quick benefits and stuff. That's what I was just going to mention real quick too. You know, once you're ready to, you'll have training. Take your time, make sure people are being trained and involved. The only thing I'll mention here is if you do a virtual training versus an in-person training, really make sure you try and hold your staff accountable if they're assigned, you know, homework to use the system on their own between meetings, because we've had that happen before with COVID and stuff, where, you know, we train on a Tuesday. I say, okay, take Wednesday to practice on your own. We'll reconvene Thursday, and we log in on Thursday and no one's had a chance to do anything. So that can really make it difficult from all parties because you're feeling rushed to go live with your new system, but maybe you're not confident. So that's just where really take that training seriously and make sure you're putting time with that. And then like Judge Lenzi mentioned, once you go live, you're gonna find things that were missed in the process. That's just a part of a project. I wish everything went perfectly, but it doesn't happen. And so just be ready for that. Your vendor should know that, you know, they'll work with you to get the system right and functional. So with that, we'll kind of do a crash course real quick on some benefits of a case management system. Judge Lenzi, feel free to kind of talk as I'm going through these, but a first one, you know, is going to be reporting needs. So if that's grant funding, you know, your system has that data already in it. So make the system work for you and generate that information. So in our system, we have several reports that can tell you, you know, your active caseload. Here's how many open cases you have. Here's how many cases that were filed during the last year. Here's how many cases that were closed in your last calendar year. Here's how many hearings you had. All of that type of stuff is being entered into the system. So we want to make sure you have an easy way to report on that information. And so I would just go to my statistics report and I'm going to be able to get all of that information and identify it. So it's looking at July. If I change this to August real quick, we can go through and I can quickly see here's how many criminal cases that were filed and information like that. So that's something your system should hopefully be able to provide for you. So you can get that information. There's also other reporting needs that may not just be grant funding or data related. You know, maybe you need your court bar. Is that something your system can generate? You know, if you have all of your attorneys already entered in the system and their address, do they have a section where you can go in and enter their licensing information? And can you see who actively has a license in the system? You know, I can see here's everyone who has an attorney and that type of stuff. If you want to generate your docket, that's a huge thing, you know, we can see as well. I log in, I can instantly see here I had a 2:30 arraignment hearing on Thursday. I have a hearing today at 3:30. That's for the same case. Here's my involved parties. Those type of things are also kind of considered, you know, reporting benefits. And you can also have the system generate forms. That's a huge thing as well. If you're entering in a plaintiff's name, the case number, and their address into the system, a lot of systems should hopefully be able to generate a certificate of mailing for you, or your notice of hearing, or things along those lines. And then kind of jumping back to the PowerPoint real quick, you know, there's also information accessibility and organization. So Judge Lenzi, for example, she works for several tribes. Some of those she is remote. How can she get their case files or that case data, you know, in an easy to read fashion? She had mentioned getting 30 emails with all the different documents. I couldn't imagine if there was, you know, 10 or 12 different open cases trying to siphon through all of that and figure it out. If you have a case management system that's online, the judge can easily log in, look up the case number in question, and I can go directly there and see, you know, here's my parties, here's what the person's been charged with, here's the documents, and it's kind of a one-stop shop for everything that they have access to. If I need to view a document, I can just click on it and see that document right here. And the nice thing is too, is it's this exact same layout for every single case or every single person that you're wanting to look up. So that way, you know, it's not like if I'm on one screen or one case, it's going to be a completely different layout. I can kind of force some unity or uniformity, I should say, in how things are entered. And also same things like fines and fees. You know, if somebody comes in and has a fine and fee and they don't know, I guess, where, you know, what case number they have, how do you get that information? I can go to my fines and fees and find that. Or if I go to Harrison's record real quick in the system, do I have an easy way to tell what fines and fees he has? So sorry. There we go. So those are all kind of tied into the different components of, you know, your accessibility and organization. So you can kind of have a one-stop shop to get all of that information. So I can go to Harrison's record. I can say, okay, it looks like you still owe $575 for the fine and fee associated with that case. Those are things, you know, that are a benefit of having an electronic case management system as well. And then the last one I'll kind of wrap it up with is going to be data integrity and data redundancy. And that essentially just means, you know, if you enter a client's information, it's in the system. You don't necessarily need to enter it again. You can treat it as more of a, I'm verifying it. So if I'm a constant offender, you know, my information may not change a whole lot between arrests. I'm not having to have my court clerk enter that information every single time. I can verify that he has that information in the system. So sorry, Judge Lenzi, for if you have a quick sec to chime in with anything else you'd like to add before you have to go.
Go ahead and click through all of those. Okay. I apologize to everyone. I do have a hearing like now online, so I need to go to that. But you've got our emails, and actually the PowerPoint, if you can post that with the recording, or at least get to the last page, that's got our contact info too. So the recording has our contact info, and I'm happy to answer questions separately. If I didn't have a hearing right now, I'd actually stick around. But there are a lot of benefits of a case management system. Remember, there's a process of, you know, trying to choose it. What do you need? Meeting with all the stakeholders, then reviewing it, what works for you, what won't work, and how will you use it. And, you know, I think it can be used to apply for more grant funding for your court and really help you. Plus, you look more professional, you gain more respect, and it really is an exercise of a tribe's sovereignty to have a good, useful case management system that everyone can benefit from.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We do have time for a few, if anybody has a quick question, if they'd want to put it in here. If not, we'll just try to wrap it up. Judge, thank you very much for being on the call today. We appreciate you and your insight. And we'll make sure everybody gets that information. So.
And if anyone has an urgent question, I'll stay for about 2 more minutes, and then I got.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Colby, anything you wanted to...
I was just going to say, just kind of chime in with Judge Lenzi said, you know, it can be a scary process when it goes through obtaining all this stuff, but that's hopefully something your vendor has experience in and can work with you on. You know, if you need references, ask your vendor for those. It's kind of like buying a car, or, you know, don't be afraid to shop around, and just again, though, make sure you really understand what you're purchasing, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Because again, you want this system to improve your outcome, you know, improve your court, make your job easier, all that type of stuff. Your vendor wants that same goal for you, but sometimes, you know, things can seem a little bit opposite when you're first starting out, just because it's a new thing. It's change. So
yeah.
Thank you all. I'm going to sign
so much.
Reach me.
All right. Thank you. Thank you to everybody on the call today. Appreciate you being here. Special thanks to Handel for the presentation today. If you guys are going to be in San Diego for TribalNet, make sure you stop by their booth. They will be there on the trade show floor. So great group of guys and gals. And with that, I think we are going to wrap it up. And everybody, hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and look for the email to come in tomorrow with a copy of the recording.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.